other thing that's obviously happening is that a lot of extra people have been hired, people are being pulled in, logistical backup by most of the major organizations, and yes, we're seeing very intense journalistic activity.
From Global Vision, the TV news magazine of Southern Africa.
The Protection of Information Act threatens journalists with jail.
It's got nothing to do with government policy. It's got nothing to do with apartheid or anything like that.
Because it is important that people know what is happening.
This week, South Africa Now features these stories.
Mandela will be free, there is no doubt about it. Because I have said often before, and I think it is simply true, if he dies in prison, whatever happened in 1976 will look like a Sunday school picnic.
Once again, there are rumors of Nelson Mandela's imminent release.
There's absolutely no doubt that we'll come out again at the end of the month.
One of South Africa's leading opposition papers has been shut down for a month.
It is insulting to hear, to me, a person telling me that my side is to stop violence when I'm here outside South Africa and the people kick me out violently there.
A confrontation in the halls of UCLA. A new film captures a debate of passion. And in our culture section, a new film, Mapenzula, South Africa's The Harder They Come. At home, it's been banned. All this and more this week on South Africa Now. Here's host Fana Kekana.
Dumelang. Once again this week, that continuing question, will the ailing Nelson Mandela be released, and if so, when? There has been a continuing flurry of rumors. Some said it would happen on the eve of the US elections, others think it will be next week or early next year. P.W. Botha, the man with the keys to the hospital door, is not talking. Reverend Allan Boesak shared his thinking on the subject with us.
One of the problems has been is how can we release him in a way that will not make it seem as if we are responding to pressures from inside and the Western world. If, for instance, Mobutu comes to South Africa, as has been announced today, he joins up with Buthelezi to make an appeal. Then the South African government can say, well, you see, there we have two respected African leaders. Now, we as Africans can respond to Africans. It'll help a lot because it'll give Buthelezi credibility, it'll give Mobutu credibility, it'll give the US credibility because Mobutu is the US's friend, and everybody will be happy. And the South African government can say it's got nothing to do with the anti-apartheid groups or the radicals, as they call us. It is our decision in responding to a respected head of state from Africa.
Press censorship in South Africa. A new example this week as the Weekly Mail is shut down for a month. We have a number of comments on aspects of press censorship, but first from Johannesburg, the voice of Weekly Mail editor Irwin Manoim on the decision by the Minister of Information.
The final warning we received was 2 weeks ago, in which he told us that he objected to, I think it was 8 articles in the newspaper, and gave us 2 weeks to give a reply, which we did last week. On Tuesday this week, he responded by telling us that the newspaper would be suspended for 1 month. And there's absolutely no doubt that we'll come out again at the end of the month.
The Weekly Mail is a leading opposition newspaper. Its closure is only the latest chapter in its run-ins with government censors. Staff writer Vusi Gumede.
Supposing I go in a township and I'm confronted with a situation where security forces attack a mob of students marching or students chanting, and I see for myself, I see soldiers or security force, members of security forces shooting at students, and supposing one student die in that kind of situation. Naturally, even if I've seen that, number one, naturally, I should not be in that kind of situation. I should not be in that kind of vicinity as a reporter. Secondly, even if I saw that, I cannot report about that until the Police Bureau of Information releases information, what they call unrest report.
Sometimes press censorship is blatant, but newspapers more frequently censor themselves. Journalist Mkhonto Mkhondo.
In many cases, we work with our lawyers more than our sources. In other words, you have to tell your lawyer everything you're going to publish. In many cases, you have to read your story to the lawyer. which is a very difficult task. And in many cases, the lawyer is the one who's going to edit the story.
To SouthScan editor David Coetzee, self-censorship is the real challenge.
There is such an array of laws and regulations at the moment that no reporter working either as a stringer for an outside setup or working in the media inside South Africa can write a sentence without being aware that they may be overstepping some mark. So of course it's very likely that people will start to pull back, will start to think, well, it's easier not to go along that particular avenue, not to develop that line of attack or thinking, and not maybe to report particular things. I think it's become really built into people's thinking, to journalists' thinking over there, and it's very understandable.
This chart, published by the Canadian government, seeks to show how the censorship process sanitizes the news that reaches North America. This recent Canadian Broadcasting Corporation news report makes the same point.
To a degree, the clampdown on reporting has been successful. For nearly 2 years, reporters have not been allowed to show pictures like these of South African security forces in action.
Images like this one have disappeared also because of a growing public relations sensibility in Pretoria. The whips are rarely in sight anymore. But was South Africa's government influenced on this point by an American professor? A new student film by Ray Navarro, A More or Less About South Africa, shows a confrontation against UCLA professor John Hutchinson, who the Los Angeles Times identified as giving media advice to the South African government.
What I advocated was the stopping of the whipping of protesters.
Why do they enjoy quoting you word for word and everything else?
This is an original report by Michael Parks in the Los Angeles Times, and it is wrong.
We read your article.
Sir, I understand it.
Do you deny that you said it?
What I'm telling you is this. I am for equal rights, but equal rights by constitutional means, by reconciliation. Let me finish. Would that Martin Luther King were here now, because that is the message he would preach, not violence. I am for equal rights by peaceful means. Now,
one man, one vote.
That's right.
One vote.
One man, of course.
What about tribes in South Africa?
I don't think, for this generation, I don't believe that a unitary state is available. We have to choose whether we want a violent or a peaceful process of change.
Where there's genocide, how can peaceful resistance to genocide take place? It's very insulting to me, sir, what you're saying, because
we have to try.
Well, you are implying that violence comes from both sides, and yet you know that South African blacks have been the most non-violent people for decades in South Africa.
Well, I don't have any rights to speak for you. I've got to emphasize that, particularly with the question of violence in mind. Second, there have been no genocide.
In the north of Namibia, SWAPO reports a mounting military buildup with 50,000 South African troops like these now stationed on the northern border with Angola. The South African military has meanwhile unveiled a new homemade military vehicle.
Mobility, protection, combat power. The key to survival in nature and the key to survival in war. These critical properties have been designed into one fighting vehicle, the Rooikat, a new concept in mobile warfare. The main weapon is a 76mm stabilized gun, which allows stationary as well as on-the-move firing. The use of a very advanced optical sight and digital fire control system gives a high first-round hit probability for distances up to 3 kilometers.
Finally, from Japan, there's word that Japanese utilities will cut off imports of South African uranium now used to power their nuclear plants. But the Japanese still have growing ties with Pretoria, explains researcher Richard Knight.
The pressure on Japan to cut back its trade links are growing. It's growing from internally in Japan and externally from the anti-apartheid movement in Western Europe and the United States, as well as, in some cases, the governments as well of Western Europe. Japan has become South Africa's single largest trading partner. Japan cars make up 40% of the auto market in South Africa, half the computers almost. So that Japan has become very, very significant for South Africa.
You are watching South Africa Now, the world's only weekly TV news magazine of Southern Africa, a program featuring the diverse voices of the region.
There's still a little space for journalists to operate, but that space diminishes all the time. As a South African journalist, I've witnessed over the past 4 or 5 years the space in which I can operate as a journalist gradually getting smaller and smaller and smaller. It's not a case of, the lights going out all at once. It's just one by one by one.
Inequality between blacks and whites in South Africa has frequently been documented, but nowhere is it more pronounced than in the field of health care. Our background report this week offers one healthcare worker's story, a young white doctor, David Coetzee, with a harrowing tale of medicine on the front line. We have seen these images on television, people being beaten or shot, but what happens to them afterwards when the cameras disappear? Delivering medical care and protecting people hurt or wounded in apartheid-related violence has become the focus of concerned South African medical workers, including Dr. David Coetzee.
We have decided to set up an alternative, independent healthcare service to offer free, confidential medical care to any person, particularly youngsters, who are victims of apartheid violence.
Many of these victims are taken to hospitals like this Baragwanath Hospital in Soweto, where some find that the police are waiting for them.
Having worked at major black hospitals, I can tell you that when a kid is injured, the police will even go into the operating theatre in khaki fatigues in order to make sure that they get that particular person arrested. The hospitals have become free game, free territory for the South African police and the South African Defence Force. They even place military doctors in those hospitals.
The apartheid system has set up separate but unequal healthcare institutions. Baragwanath here in Soweto is overcrowded, with people on the floor and 2 to a bed, as this French TV documentary shows.
Baragwanath Hospital, serving Soweto's 2.5 million people, has been 200% overcrowded for the last 35 years. Successive generations of doctors have complained about this abominable state of affairs. The fact that there's one bath for 200 people, that there are no toilet seats for wards in which patients with tuberculosis and AIDS are lying next to one another. The fact that there are no mattresses. As doctors, we organized a protest action. We went to buy 40 mattresses and brought them into the hospital. The state promptly removed them because they were not state-authorized mattresses. We face a situation where the hospitals are a threat to health themselves.
In contrast, Johannesburg Hospital is a modern, efficient institution where conditions compare with the best in the world.
The white Johannesburg Hospital is 2/3 empty. 2/3 of its wards have never been opened to the public.
So when there are confrontations, activists sometimes try to treat themselves.
We have had stories of children who, with razor blades and knives, try to get birdshot and buckshot out of their bodies.
In operating on one victim of gunshot wounds, Dr. Coetzee became caught up in a confrontation with the state.
In February 1987, I was called to a farmhouse north of Johannesburg. A young man apparently had been injured in a clash with the police in a black township. I tried to persuade this young man to come with me to a major black hospital where I could perform this procedure under optimal conditions. He was afraid, in fact terrified, of being arrested in his hospital bed. I decided to operate on him, on the farm, in a bathroom. What we did is we sterilized the bathroom. We were able to operate on this young man and restore him to a state of functional health.
What subsequently happened to that young man?
I believe the young man was caught by the police. He was trapped in a house in Soweto, and they drove a tank over the house, crushing him to death. After his death, I was recalled by the South African police, and I was forced to view his mutilated body.
Subsequently, another man accused as an accomplice, journalist Tembe Kumalo, was captured, tried, and sentenced to 8 years of hard labor. But during the investigation, the police questioned Dr. Seftel.
I was taken to the 8th floor of John Vorster Square. My head was bashed against the wall. I was punched all over the body. I was forced to write things, and then when they were not satisfactory, they tore it up, threw it on the floor, forced me to eat the piece of paper that I'd written the statement on. I was dragged to an open window where they showed me the view, and they told me that many people had been thrown out of that window, and many people would be thrown out of that window. When I closed my eyes, they put their fingers into my eyes, and they said, "We are going to make you see." That is the real horror and the tragedy of the apartheid system.
Dr. Seftel is just one of many medical workers involved in the movement for change in South Africa. Like Dr. Fabian Ribeiro, seen here in his clinic before he was shot to death, they treat detainees and victims of police violence. Dr. Seftel says that the fact that Nelson Mandela contracted tuberculosis in prison is the ultimate indictment of South African health care.
The fact that he was allowed to be neglected in this way is a sign and symptom of a disease of irresponsibility in healthcare services throughout the country. If they don't care for Nelson Mandela's health, which black do they care for?
South Africa Now will be seen every week at this time. Coming up next, our cultural segment featuring the best music, film, drama, and artistic expressions from Southern Africa.
Last week on this program, we showed you part of a new documentary film that had been seized by South African authorities. This week, we bring you the exclusive television preview of a new feature film about black life in South Africa that has been compared with the Jamaican cult classic, The Harder They Come. After just 2 screenings in Johannesburg, this movie, Mapantsula, was banned. Here's the story.
The movie is about a gangster called Panic. He just lives on pickpocketing and backsnatching and all these petty crimes. He isn't that much serious about politics.
The movie is called Mapantsula, and the star of the movie and its co-writer is Thomas Mogotlane.
Yes, well, it's a true story about some people that I know. Some of them are my friends, and some of them are just the people that I come to know.
Shot entirely on location in Johannesburg and Soweto, Mapantsula is one of the first feature films ever written by a black South African. Despite its realistic depiction of life inside South Africa today, the filmmakers say Mapantsula is not political. Producer Max Montocchio.
It's a story of an anti-hero, an everyday guy, a black guy, and it differs from other films that have been made about South Africa in that it was made there, in Johannesburg and Soweto, by South Africans, and it's about blacks, and very ordinary ones, just your man in the street and the problems he faces.
I wouldn't say it's political, but now, according to a black man's life, it is political to the white man.
Mogotlane plays a man named Panic, who thinks that living the straight life is a sucker's game. To Panic, life is nothing more than an endless scam, an opportunity to get something for nothing.
Is it? See you tomorrow, my friend.
Although he lives in a world of intense political and social upheaval, Panic tries to ignore it until the moment when his younger brother Sam is arrested by the authorities.
Uzabathu kune trouble.
Despite his best efforts, Panic inevitably gets caught up in a vortex of events beyond his control.
Attention! Attention! This is an illegal gathering. In terms of the Internal Security Act, you have 7 minutes to disperse. If you are not dispersed,
in the end, Panic gets arrested, but not, ironically, for robbing people on the street.
what the fuck do you think you're doing? Stop, stop. What's this? Turn around.
The police soon learn that Panic has a history of squealing on his cellmates to save his own skin. They decide to use him to get information about the political prisoners he shares a cell with.
Bandit, vision.
Ultimately, Panic faces a choice, like everyone living in South Africa today.
I can give you a new identity, a new name, 5,000 rand in your pocket. I'm not asking much of you.
Ironically, though, by the end of the film, he has become politicized. The interrogation works the wrong way. And at the end of the film, he makes a moral judgment. And I think a universal theme of the film is that it's an immoral man that makes a moral judgment at the end of the film. It's an apolitical man that becomes politicized through the system.
At first, Mapanzula was welcomed inside South Africa by both the people in the townships and the authorities.
During the shooting, it was fine. People were excited about it because now, at least, this was the first script written by a black man.
We discovered we were not subject to the emergency regulations because the film was fictional. So it wasn't news, it wasn't media. And in anticipation of problems from the authorities, we decided, rather than to be clandestine about making it, that we would actually tell everyone that we were making a film.
When the film was finished, it was shown at a festival in Johannesburg and then promptly banned.
It's banned. It is not allowed. Yeah, under conditions that it might be inciting. It cannot be shown to black people in South Africa because they might get incited and start revolting.
Last fall, Mapanzula was shown at the prestigious New York Film Festival. To date, the film has been released in Australia and France and will open in England early next year. But the filmmakers are still looking for a distributor in the United States.
South Africa Now is seen at this time every week. To share your comments or for a free resource list, send a self-addressed stamped envelope to South Africa Now, 361 West Broadway, New York, New York, 10013. South Africa Now is produced in association with the Africa Fund.